Good afternoon, everyone. It's Dr. Ramon Goings with the Done Dissertation, where we demystify the dissertation process so that you can finish your dissertation in 1 year or less. Hi, this is Dr. Ramon Goings with the Done Dissertation. I want to say thank you for tuning in to Done Dissertation Office Hours. As a special gift, I want to provide you a 10 strategies to complete your dissertation in 1 year checklist. This checklist provides strategy on how to improve your academic writing, how to navigate the dissertation process, and how to select committee members to ensure that you get through the dissertation with the least amount of headache. And as an additional bonus, I'm including an audio training which augments what's provided on the 10 strategy checklist. To get access to this checklist, I invite you to visit www.dissertationstrategy.com or text #free, FREE, to 301-701-2466. Now back to the show. And welcome to viewing Done Dissertation Office Hours, where we talk with researchers and doctoral students about their education and dissertation journey and all the great work that they've done or plan to do with their doctoral degree. We have a special guest and our first engineer on the show, which I'm excited about to kind of get into her background and history. But our guest today is Katelyn Williams, who is a PhD student in industrial and systems engineering at North Carolina A&T University. I want to bring Katelyn on and let's welcome her to the show. Katelyn, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
No problem. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So I think it's important to understand where people are present is that we need to go back in the past. And I would love to hear about your educational journey, even as someone in your K through 12 experience. So what gets you to even being interested in engineering? Because you don't often hear that. So I'm curious as to, what pushed you in that direction.
So I've always loved science, and luckily I went to a private school for kindergarten where we did a lot of hands-on stuff. So it really started there when we started working with like butterflies, the butterfly experiment. We have caterpillars and you see like their life cycle. So that's where it really started for me. But when I got older in 6th grade, my science teacher at the time noticed that I was just bored in class. And instead of looking at it as a disciplinary problem, she actually went down the hall to the honor science teacher and asked if I could just be in her class. And there I started excelling. And she noticed like, okay, this girl is like, she's really into science, and recommended me for something in my hometown called FAME, which stands for Forum to Advance Minorities in Engineering. And I was in FAME from 6th grade until I graduated from high school.
Wow.
So that gave me a lot of exposure and experience, not just on like sciencey stuff in general, like science fair, the scientific process. I was always ahead of my grade level because we had summer school for FAME. And during my junior year, summer going into my junior year and into my senior year in high school, we actually stayed on campus at University of Delaware. So I was already preparing for college level courses. And not only that, I was involved in Science Olympiad, and the teacher at the time when I was in middle school told my mom, like, this girl is good. You have to make sure she stays in science. And it was never okay, these teachers are telling me she's good, like, let me force her into it. It was more of a, let me nurture her type thing. So my family really motivated me to stick to the things that I liked, and I liked science. So that's kind of like the K through 12 portion. And in undergrad, I majored in biology, but for some reason, the general bio classes weren't sticking for me, honestly. I did better in the more focused topics than like the broad sciences. So when I was thinking about engineering, I thought about that experience that I had with my coursework. And for my master's and now PhD, I looked at it from the lens of, if I like these classes enough, I know I'll do well. So I dissected the curriculums to make sure, like, I like engineering, yes, but what type of engineer do you want to be? What types of things do you want to learn? So that's how I got to where I am today.
Yeah. And so do you think there was a shift or a tough shift to make as an undergraduate going from biology to engineering? Like, because I asked that because you see a lot of students, particularly in STEM, maybe move to another discipline. And what was that shift like for you?
It wasn't easy, not gonna lie. A lot of terms being flown around that I've never heard before. So there was a learning gap that I had to fill quickly. But I'm just so glad I had classmates who saw the gap and were willing to like just dissect things a little bit more for me, as opposed to looking at it as like a weakness. So that helped, and just some preparation before I started my master's program. It wasn't too big of a leap because I went from biology to bioengineering.
Okay.
So the human systems I understood, it was just tying that in with those engineering terms that people were throwing around. So I did have to take a couple of classes to get caught up, but it wasn't as painful or as hard as people think it is.
Yeah, and so on your website, you talk about this. You share the data that less than 4% of engineers are women of color. What do you think is happening? Is it a? I get asked this question because I do a lot of K-12 and higher ed work, but is it a
Mhm.
K-12 situation or is it higher ed, or do you see it as both? So what's happening that impacts that data and why we see it like that?
I think it's a mix of both because having the community that I had, not just from the family perspective, but from the K through 12 perspective,
Yeah.
makes a difference in the outcome of students because then you go to higher ed with that support behind you already and you're just confident in what you can do. So if you didn't have that K through 12, but then you go to higher ed, it's also their responsibility to help you and help you nurture that love for STEM. And I see it kind of like it's both. You have to be surrounded by people who want to see you succeed, especially on the higher ed perspective.
Yeah.
But it's on you, unfortunately, as the student to find those people because not every professor is going to like help steer you in the right direction or hold your hand. But yeah, I think it's both.
Yeah, and so now being in a doctoral program, as we like fast forwarding, do you still take that same approach? Like, do you have a team in place that really supports you to help you navigate the program? Like, what does your team look like now, knowing that support is necessary?
So my team looks a little different just because now being on the doctoral level, I'm the first person in my family to become an engineer and then to obtain, well, go into a doctoral
Let's
program.
put it into existence. You're going to obtain that thing in the
Yeah.
next year. That's what we're going to put it out there.
Yes. So my team is really more so my advisors. They understand my background. They understand what I want to do, not just as an engineer, but as someone who does own their own business and just my career aspirations. So they've done a really good job of just listening to what I need as a student, what I need from them as my advisors, and how we can work together to like cultivate something that's not super stressful, but also holding me accountable and just a better environment than what I've heard from a lot of other PhD students that are currently in the same situation as me. It makes me getting this doctorate degree a lot easier because of the people I'm interacting with on a daily basis.
Sure, sure. And for folks who are just tuning in, we're talking with Katelyn Williams. The next year or so, Dr. Katelyn Williams, who is a PhD student at North Carolina A&T. We're just talking about her educational journey, her background, and how she's gotten to where she's gotten. And so, what I want to do is talk about, since you're in your program, you're starting to think about, if you haven't already solidified your dissertation topic, like what are you thinking about doing for your dissertation at this point?
So right now I'm looking more so on the automotive side. So though my PhD is in industrial systems engineering, I do learn a lot about manufacturing, supply chain, just the typical like factory environment that
Sure.
people know. But industrial systems engineering is also dealing with human factors or how we as humans interact with the world around us to make things a little bit easier on a human. That's where I step in. So for example, if you are someone that works on an assembly line, I'm the person that's going to make sure you're not overexerting yourself. If you're looking at working with a big piece of machinery or a robot, how the robot can interact with you and vice versa, so no one gets hurt. So for my dissertation research, I'm looking at um, just developing algorithms for the safety of humans during car crashes.
Wow. Okay.
Going through a lot of different simulations that already have been conducted because I'm still working in a virtual environment because of COVID and trying to figure out if there's some predictive elements that go in prior to the car crash.
Wow, that's amazing. And something that me being an education researcher, just thinking about the implications of what we do, but what you're doing is life changing in slightly different ways. But it's just like interesting how there's so many opportunities for students out here to do life changing
Mhm.
work in every discipline. We just
Yep.
often don't think about, and I never thought about the automotive side. There's people behind that, the technology and the things that impact what's happening and the results that we see. So I'm
Yep.
glad to hear that you're doing that work. And
Thank you.
what made you make that shift to looking, besides being immersed in coursework, was there any like internship opportunities or things that really pushed you in this trajectory?
Internships, yes. I really enjoy working with human subjects. Um, just interacting with them, getting the data, and like it's your first step of explaining what you're doing to other people
Yeah.
in a non-scientific way. So those experiences really helped me figure out like this is the type of research that I want to do. But due to COVID, having to switch my dissertation topic quite a few times,
Sure.
um, my research is always generated from personal experiences. So when I was in sixth grade, my mom was in a really bad car accident. And that kind of inspired me to do research in the automotive side.
Mm. Yeah, I think people don't often think about that in all disciplines. Sometimes our research comes from those personal experiences.
Mhm.
So that's very, very interesting. A lot of times it makes it a lot not easier, but when you probably experience it, you're going through your program, it gives you a why. Like, I'm
Yes,
not just doing
yes,
research for research purposes, but I'm actually like going to change and make sure something doesn't happen to someone else that happened to my family.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hey, it's Dr. Ramon Goings with the Done Dissertation. And look, I know you're enjoying the episode, but I want to tell you real quick about the Done Dissertation. We are demystifying the dissertation process so that doctoral students can complete their entire dissertation in 1 year or less. With that, I want to invite you to learn more about the Velocity Group Coaching Program, which is a 4-month group coaching program that provides doctoral students the support to either write and defend their dissertation proposal or write and finish up their dissertation in the next 4 months. And you heard that right. Our students in our program are finishing in the next 4 months. If you've gone through the dissertation process alone and become very frustrated with the lack of support from your advisor and not having a support structure in terms of students in your program, we want to provide that structure for you and provide you the written feedback and support to know exactly what your professors are looking for when they read your dissertation. To learn more about the Velocity Group Coaching Program, visit www.velocitydissertation.com or text hashtag Velocity to 301-701-2466. Now back to the show. Yeah, and so with that, you're going through your dissertation. Have you started at this point working on your dissertation, or are you still in kind of the beginning phases of that for you?
So I'm still in the beginning phases,
Okay.
forming the formal research question with the formal aims. But the topic is solid, and I just recently ironed out my timeline to graduation, so I know what I need to do at like each month leading up till then,
Yeah.
and meeting the university requirements in the process.
Yeah, so like my clients who participate in our Velocity Group Coaching Program, we often talk about like the foundational piece is having a plan in place. So I'm glad
Mhm.
that you mentioned that you have a plan. How did you develop your plan? Was your chair involved with that, or did you kind of create it and bring it to them? I asked because I know I have folks that are watching that are trying to figure out how do I navigate this process and come up with a plan that will actually get me out of the program.
Okay. So for me, my plan was contingent on the length of time for my funding. So
Okay.
I know that I have 4 full years of funding through a grant. And I knew that at the end of those 4 years, that's when I needed to graduate. So I
Sure.
started working backwards. When's the latest I can defend my dissertation without having to scramble? So
Sure.
for me, that would be April 2023. um, just to make sure, like, if I have to do it the following semester, I'm okay. Um, but from working backwards, I also had an advantage on my side
Sure.
because I took a lot of the classes that I needed for this degree for my master's degree at A&T. So a lot of those already transferred. So I'm already ahead because I'm not taking the same number of courses as the students who started with me. So working backwards was the best plan of attack since for my last 2 years, I'm just doing research. So now we have to factor in all of those comprehensive exams. So I do count my dissertation and proposal as comprehensive exams, which are the
Okay.
last two that I have. But in the spring, I took my preliminary exam, which is research based. So just demonstrating that I understand the knowledge necessary to execute what I've presented to my committee already.
Yeah.
And then the semester before that, I took the qualifying exam, which is just testing that if you know what the industrial engineer needs to know at my institution through an actual sit down exam. So that approach, like saying, okay, so by April 2023, I need to defend, but I have the contingency of you have to have a 6 month gap in between your proposal and your defense.
Oh, I
So I
hate
knew 6 months
that. Yeah.
earlier I would have to propose. So now between the proposal and you taking your preliminary exam is when you need to do the bulk of your research. So that's the steps that I'm on right now. And it was something that my main advisor developed for me, since it was considered a special case with me not having to take as many courses as the
Sure.
typical student. So it worked out for the both of us. So I'm not rushing to get the dissertation out and defend. And then, in the off chance I fail, I'm going to have to figure out funding for the next semester. Um, and for them, so they just have peace of mind, like, okay, we've gone over her steps, and now I have what I need to like hold her accountable to say, okay, you should have this by now, like, let's talk about some deliverables. So that's how it worked out.
Yeah, you did a good job with, like, because that policy, like, for a lot of students, been like 6 months. Like, oh my God, like, that messes people up. But you've been
It
pretty
does.
strategic of, like, how do you plan, including the 6 months in your timeline. Some people don't include that, and then you show up and you're like, oh my God, 6 months, I'm ready to defend, or I'm ready to move
Yep.
forward right now.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm glad that you did that. And with that, so you have your timeline in place. What have been some of the challenges that you experienced so far? I know COVID, you mentioned that, but if you can elaborate on that aspect, if that's been a challenge, or whatever else has been a challenge so far as you're trying to finish up your program.
So mainly it has been COVID. The I had like 3 or 4 topics initially, but the problem with that was COVID hit and
Mm.
I needed human subjects. So instead of saying, like, okay, let's move forward with this and see what happens, my 2 advisors just said, stop. But you haven't done any research, real research yet. I know you spent time figuring out these topics, but we need to find something that's 100% virtual that still has that impact. Um, and then we could add a humanistic aspect to an aim
Okay.
if necessary. So after, like, the one thing I was talking about was working with the military to develop new technology. And then I was like, okay, can't work with them because got to be face to face for a lot of those things.
Yeah.
And then even working with people, just giving out surveys, you would still have to go through the IRB. So the IRB was backed up because no one could do that type of research. So that's how I landed on the topic that I did, but it was honestly a 6 to 9 month process. As soon as, what was it, March 2020 came
Yeah.
around, I didn't have a solid topic until about February of this year.
Okay.
So it's been a process. It's been a process.
What, for a lot of folks, that would have been a deterrent, right? And they might have said, all right, I'm going to move on, get my job doing something. I'll come back to the dissertation. Like, what's kept you moving forward with this despite the setback of the time frame between March 2020 and February 21? What's keeping you moving forward?
Because this is something that I chose to do. As soon as I put my mind to something, I have to finish it. It hasn't been easy, especially with that wrench thrown in at the beginning of it for me, but it's something that's like, it's a minor setback. It would be different if we didn't have the virtual environment, if we were in, like, rewind 50 years where we don't have the type of technology, then maybe I would seriously consider it.
Yeah.
But knowing what I knew I could do with the different types of technology out there and even open source data, I knew I could come up with something that would be comparable to things that I like to do in the physical environment.
Yeah, I hope folks are taking that gem. Like sometimes your dissertation project doesn't shape how you want it to. It's just work with what you got and get out the program because you get it.
Yeah.
Once you get
Yep.
out, you can do all this work that you want to do later. I mean, it's not gonna be forever, so you'll be able to do the work with participants, if you will, in person at some point in the future. But I need to get through this process now.
Yeah.
No need to get held up in that. Some people get stuck and just wait and try to wait it out. But
Yeah.
you've been really smart about that.
Thank you.
And so what other, so, you experienced COVID. Has there been anything about your program that's been challenging for you to get through as a doctoral student that you would probably, tell other doctoral students, be aware of this, particularly in engineering?
The days and times of certain classes. Unfortunately, specific classes for us are only offered at specific times of the year,
Mm,
and they're required classes most of the time. So it's like you can't just say, oh, I'll just wait until it rolls back around spring semester when it's not offered in the spring semester. It's only offered in the fall, and you've already registered to graduate in the spring, and here you are in this predicament trying to figure things out. So you really need to know when your classes are offered during the academic school year, and also talk to your professors about it as well, because as someone who's in human factors, I unfortunately don't have a lot of classes to choose from during the regular school year. Most of the classes that I would take are in the fall, so I can only take 3 classes max,
okay.
and they're offering like all of the classes that I would need to take this one time of year. So it's like we need to figure out a compromise here. Like, what can I do as a workaround, knowing this is where my core classes are and I can't take all of them without feeling overwhelmed. So know when they are scheduled during the school year, but also don't be afraid to express your concerns with the faculty, because they do take it into consideration. Um, Especially on the PhD level, it's only like a few students who really need these classes on the 800 level. So they'll listen to you in that sense and make sure, like, okay, here's what we're going to do. You need to make sure we have at least this number of students that are willing to take this class so it can stay on the roster.
Right.
So they'll definitely work with you in that sense.
That's great. That's a great suggestion. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And so as you're, that's great advice for folks in the coursework. So as you've been writing, what has been your writing routine? 'Cause I get this question all the time. Like, how do you actually sit down and write your dissertation? So are you a morning writer, evening writer, binge writer? What's your flow for writing?
Binge writing, and
Okay.
I do not suggest that at all.
I
It's
don't
only been
either. Go ahead.
it's only been like that just because spring and fall semester are when I took my 2 comprehensive exams,
Okay.
and I also don't recommend taking them like back to back in semesters. Again, it was a special case. Um, I have a highly motivated committee, and they were like, "Oh, you'll be fine,"
Yeah.
making sure that I was okay. Um, but yeah, it kind of took me out. So, um, if when I sit down and start writing, I'm still in the beginning, so I'm just doing the literature review portions, but I'll just binge write, and I don't recommend it. But for my thesis, it was a specific time. Since I only had to do it for like maybe a semester, it was just during the day. Since I was only taking one class, I was able to do it around my class, and I would literally just write like sporadically 9 to 5, not every day of the week, maybe 3 times a week, to send in the edits, get back edits, and then correct everything, then write some more. So it was an ongoing process, and I preferred it that way to what I'm doing now because it's just all over the place.
No, I get that. And so my book, 14 Secrets to a Done Dissertation, I talk about the idea that it's better to be a daily writer or something very consistent,
Hmm.
because I think part of it, maybe you talk about if you experience this, is that when you binge write, let's say you wrote on Tuesday, and the next time you come back to the document is Saturday.
Yep.
A lot happened between Tuesday and Saturday. And I know for
Yep.
sometimes your mind's not even in that frame to like sit. I don't even remember what I wrote from Tuesday
Yep.
on Saturday. So did you experience that at all? Like engage
Yeah.
in binge writing?
I've deleted entire pages of work because it's like I'll go back and read it and it not make sense to me in that moment. And it's like I should have just written around it or made like some comments as opposed to deleting it. And then it's like this ongoing cycle of trying to make it sound right when in reality I'm still in the beginning part of the process. And like you said, you forget what you write. So it's like, I forgot that I said X, Y, and Z, or I forgot to add this source in as I'm typing, and I don't remember the article it came from. And it's just like you go down the rabbit hole when you binge write.
Yeah, it's just so tough. It's so as you're writing, you've done both ways, binge writing and being consistent with your writing routine. Let me ask you something. Do you play music when you write?
Yeah, I actually listen to film scores, so I don't listen to
Okay,
music with words because then you'll realize you're starting to type the lyrics if you know them. And listening to film scores of movies that I really like is kind of like the middle ground for me.
that's cool. Yeah, I listen to I like hip hop, jazz, and so this is one I was called
Yeah,
Hidden Beach
I like.
recordings.
Yeah, I love listening to them as well.
Yeah, because I listen to all that stuff. Because it's like songs that I like, but just in the jazz
Hmm.
version, so I can like hum along, but it's not the words in my ear, so like type them
Right.
out. Because I've done that too.
Yep.
Any other pieces of your writing routine? So you talk about the structure, talk about you listen to music. Anything else that you like to do? You like to have an ambiance when you write? Like what other things are part of your routine?
I have to be in the lab, which because of COVID is hard. So being in the lab environment is like the extra piece of the structure that I need since I'm not at home. But now that I am at home, I have to like do whatever I need to make sure I'm in that lab environment. So cleaned off spaces, not too much going on around me.
Okay.
I'll even put my phone on do not disturb. Um, just things to help create like, okay, you're in school, you're off campus, you're not here in a sense. And I'll make sure that I have things near me like snacks, water, so I'm not constantly like, oh, I forgot this, oh, I forgot that, where everything is right there on my desk, just like it would be if I were on campus.
Oh, that's cool. So you recreate that lab environment. I know a lot of people are trying to figure out how to do that. I literally
Yeah.
built this library behind me because I was like, I need an environment. I didn't have this. Didn't exist until COVID because I'm like, I need somewhere to do my work and like somewhere that's inviting as if I was in the office. So I'm glad that
Hmm.
you put that in place. I think that's important for a lot of folks trying to figure out how do I make my space, whatever space I have, work.
Yeah.
As you navigate your program. And so, as you've been navigating your program, going through the process, what advice would you give to yourself now, being where you are now versus when you first started the program? Like, which suggestions would you give to yourself a year or two, whenever it is that you started your program?
um be ready to be flexible because you don't know what's going to happen. And being flexible doesn't mean like you have to give up something that you've been working on or change things entirely. It's like when something is thrown at you, you're just able to like dodge a little bit and then keep moving. Um, because no one expected COVID, and that's when I started my program. Is
Mhm.
the fall 2019. So 2020 rolls around, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness, this is here.
Yeah.
So now you know what's going to happen. And having that flexibility and going into it with that type of mindset would have made things a lot easier as far as that transition for me. And a lot of students, it was very difficult to go from learning math in person, where it's like, okay, but what about this? All of these subjects that require constant discussion, to we're confined to our desks at home in front of a computer screen in a week. So being flexible and just being able to adapt is something that I would have told myself in 2019.
Sure. Any other advice that you would give the doctoral students that are trying to get through their programs? Any other things that you learned along the way?
Don't be afraid to speak up. Um, a lot of students feel as though their advisors or the committee members are like the gatekeepers to them
Yeah.
graduating. And I understand that you feel that way, because in reality they are. But the problem is, it's not a relationship where you're able to openly communicate with them like, okay, this is where I'm having trouble with, like, let's talk about some solutions. A lot of times doctoral students have that one-sided relationship where their advisor is telling them, this is what you're going to do, this is when you're going to show up, all of these things. And before you even get to the point of research, you really want to sit down with your potential lab advisor, because you're going to be talking to them every day once you start ramping up the research. And you need them to know the type of person you are. So my main advisor, when I started with him for my master's degree, and he actually had an interview process for us as students. And it
Great.
wasn't like he wasn't going to let us in his lab. It was more so we could understand where he was coming from and he could understand us. And I really took that and applied it to looking for other advisors for my committee. And because I did something like that, my team knows if it's not important, Katelyn is not going to email us at midnight on a Wednesday. If it's not a deadline, like, she's not going to send a response, and we don't expect one, which is fair, because I've said that to them. I've expressed, like, if we're not meeting a deadline, I may not respond to you until the next business day. Something else too is my, like, schedule. Some labs have a set schedule where you have to be in lab from this time to this time, whereas for me it's like, as long as you meet these deadlines, we're okay with it. You want to talk to us outside of a meeting time, it's cool. And having these open discussions with potential lab advisors or PIs will save you a lot of stress in the long run. Because, I mean, being in a doctoral program is stressful in itself, but when you have to deal with the barriers of people who you have to talk to all the time, just makes it 10 times worse. So getting to know those people really pays off when you do it in the beginning.
That's so smart. I think the word kind of summarize what you said, communication, right? So the more likely you are in communication, the easier this process gets. But
Hmm.
you've been very smart, and I think people oftentimes don't think about their advisor or their committee members and having that conversation until it's too late. And now we're in quarrels, we got issues because, let's say, they had an expectation for you to return that email same day,
Hmm.
whereas had you had a conversation, they would have known, all right, Katelyn's not going to return until the next day,
Yeah.
if it's not a deadline. So I'm just, you're doing all the right things to get through this process. Like I said, we get a lot of clients who mess up and then they're stuck, and then it's like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I need help to fix it.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to hear that you're doing this. And also with this, I want to kind of transition a little bit to talk about kind of your work more broadly. As I looked into what you've been doing, this idea in your work around the curly scientist, I would love to hear more about this and how, you connected to your work that you're doing and what made you start it and where
Okay.
it's gone since then.
So the Curly Scientist actually started as a hair blog. Um, I started on Tumblr and YouTube, just posting how I did my hair, because people were just asking me all the time. So I was
Yeah,
like, all right, let's just put it out there, fine, whatever. And then when I got into grad school, I started posting more about my research and what I do as an engineer. And it kind of transitioned from hair to science. And I'm like, okay. And I just started posting a little bit more frequently. And all of a sudden, pandemic hits, and I'm posting more and more because I'm home,
sure.
on my stories, especially. And then out of nowhere, I'm getting contacted from, like, my school. I did a whole work from home video for their Instagram, or just collaborating with people to talk more about the, like, different topics that grad students faced on, like, their podcasts. And it really was like, oh, okay. So then I looked at it as a positive, in the sense of, all right, people keep asking me these questions. There's something that I know that people want to hear. Why don't I just start talking more to students?
Yeah.
So I started working with a few students who were interested in going to graduate school, helping them through the process of applications to interviews to even finding funding, to make that process easier. Because it's not that what you do in grad school is difficult, because you get to choose your program. All of that stuff is like, this is on you. So it's not hard. It's hard because of the work, but it's not hard because, it's what you want to do. But to get in is like, you have to get through the gate. And a lot of times people don't know what it takes to get through the gate. And before I went to grad school, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So there was a gap I had of just working in general. And before I applied, I was like, okay, I need to make sure I have all of my ducks in a row so I can just get into the one school that I'm going to apply to, which was A&T.
Okay.
And then from there, it's like, okay, I have to find the funding. I have to make these connections. And I'm like, things that came so easy for me is difficult for a lot of students because they don't know how to do that. So working with them to understand the importance of not just the book part of school, but the networking part, how to make connections, um, how to just put yourself out there without being arrogant is very important as
Yeah.
well. So working with them through that for the past school year has been like quite the experience. So that's where the new curly scientist is, and it's been quite the journey. So I'm a business owner now, and I've been working on revamping everything so I'm able not to just offer the services to students that are in my local vicinity, but also nationwide.
Yeah, I think, and if you haven't thought about this yet, this is on the business side of things. Like, you should write a book about how to help students do it. It's very simple, but I think that'll help you accelerate everything else that you're going to do on the back end. Just knowing what books do in this type of space, informational,
Yeah.
like, it'd be very pivotal for you moving forward. And so, in terms of services, if somebody wanted to work with you, what type of services do you provide? If you could talk a little bit more about that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so I do offer one-on-one services where we will sit down together and you just will tell me everything as far as your educational and career goals are. So we can come up with like a game plan for you to say, okay, so this month I'm going to work on this month I'm going to work on that. So by the time this big event, it could be a career fair, it could be you sending in your applications, you're prepared, your nervousness and anxiousness is subsided and turned into excitement, and you feel really good about going through those motions. And another service I'm going to be offering is more so in the group space where we as a group talk about the different parts of the applications, whether it is grad school applications or undergrad applications. So you have a team that's doing the same thing as you, so you don't feel like you're alone. And just webinars in general, not necessarily about the educational aspect and how to navigate that, but more so about like the interpersonal connections that you need to make with your classmates, your professors, and those people in not necessarily power, but in those
Yeah.
high places on campus so they can look out for you when things start to go awry. And something else that I'm doing is I will be putting out online courses for students to take who are more, I don't want to say DIY, but more independent learners.
Yeah.
So they're able to view those and hear some tips and tricks that have worked, not just for me, but with other students that I've been working with.
That's great. And if you can't, just tell folks your website so people can go check that out, because I know you're going to be revamping over time, but I want to send folks
Yep.
your.
So my website is thecurlyscientist.com. That is Curly with a C. A lot of people think it's a K because my first name is Katelyn, but it's Curly with a C.
That's cool. So make sure you all check out the Curly Scientist. And as we wrap up, what's next for you? Like, what does life look like post dissertation? Because I think people go into this process, PhD programs, with a goal, of course, of finishing, but there's always something after that. So I'm curious, what does your after look like for you? What do you want to do next?
After for me looks like I'm working in industry. I personally do not want to enter academia, but working in industry, I may be an adjunct professor. And of course, working more on the curly scientist and hopefully getting booked for different engagements, speaking at schools, little things that I do now, but on a larger scale.
And let's talk about this real quick as we wrap up. What, in higher ed, in particular PhD programs, often we're trained to do the work to go into academia. What does that look like in engineering? Is that the same mindset that maybe professors have? Or is it more so like they want you to go to industry? I'm just curious.
Depends. It depends on the school, honestly. Again, I'm lucky. My advisors, they're like, do what you want to do. Just let us know so we can help you get where you want to get.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate them. They also were the ones who encouraged me to apply to internships, even though that's frowned upon for PhD students to get internships over the summer, since it takes away from your research. But they all were like, go ahead and apply, go to these internships so you can see what industry is like, because we can give you the academic experience,
Yeah.
but we can't give you the industry experience. So, yeah.
That's so interesting. And just like a quick story for folks, when I was doing my doctorate, we had an internship requirement. And I said, fine, I'll do an internship during the summer. and I applied initially. I think it was the U.S. Department of Education, because I'm an education background. Next thing you know, I get a call for David John. Shout out to David, who was executive director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. That one experience shifted my whole career. And it's like, you just never know with these opportunities. And I'm glad that you took advantage and didn't go into that mindset like I need to sit and just do research.
Yeah. Yep. And you can always do research in industry, and that's something a lot of students don't know. And I love doing research, but on the academic level, balancing the grading, talking to students, and I had to do it in my master's program, and it was overwhelming. So I could only imagine what it's like as a full-fledged professor.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not the thing for everybody. But like you said, once you have the research skill set, you can use it wherever you go and never leave you. So I think I'm glad that you're using it for that way, that you're doing both industry and possibly continue to do your research.
Yep.
Well, Katelyn, I want to say thank you so much for being a participant on the show. We really enjoyed the conversation. And what I want to do, I'm going to put you backstage for a second as I wrap up the show, and then we'll chat for a couple minutes. But real quick before we end, just tell people your website one more time.
My website is www.thecurlyscientist.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katelyn.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks. So thank you all to another episode of the Done Dissertation Office Hours. I'm your host, Dr. Ramon Goings, founder of the Done Dissertation, where we demystify the dissertation process so that doctoral students can finish the dissertation in 1 year or less. If you're interested in learning more about Katelyn, feel free to visit our website, www.thecurlyscientist.com, and it'll be in the show notes as well. And if you're interested in working with us in the Velocity Group coaching program, feel free to shoot us a message or visit our website at www.thedonedissertation.com. And I look forward to seeing you all next week as we have Mia Wright to discuss her experience and her journey motivating women across the globe. And I look forward to talking to you all next week. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email, shoot me a DM, wherever you saw this programming. And I look forward to talking to you all